Imagine this, the year is 1983 and you are attending a conference held by the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. You arrive in the city of Pripyat and approach its beautiful palace of culture where the event is taking place. Upon entering you meet this lady, she greets you, explains how it will all go and registers you on the list. Unknown to you, you have just had a conversation with a KGB agent. That evening, this very lady will write down everything, what you said, how you looked, and what you did. Unknown to you, many other watchful eyes will follow your every move. And even if you had a guess, you would never imagine how vast the web around you really was. This is its story. In 2021, these two books appeared on my table, titled The Chernobyl Files of the KGB. This wasn't the first public release of formerly classified papers, but it was by far the most revealing. Because it covers the period from the very beginning of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant construction in 1970 up to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. In total, there are 331 documents, and together they give a remarkable insight into the scale of the KGB's agent network, their scope of interest, and surveillance practices in the Chernobyl region. But most importantly, they show how problems, ignored for decades, led to the greatest nuclear disaster in human history. But let's be honest, in the West, the KGB is often seen as some sort of mysterious force. And so, before we look at some of these papers, let me briefly explain a few very essential facts that will help make sense of what we're about to see. Officially, the acronym KGB stood for the Committee of State Security of the Soviet Government, the Council of Ministers, or Sovmin. Created in 1954 and legally defined as a committee, in practice it was something much larger. A full-scale military service with nearly 500,000 people serving, and probably millions involved as agents and informants. The KGB had numerous highly specialized departments and branches in every republic, and every city, from Moscow to Pripyat. It managed internal security, intelligence and counterintelligence, but above all, it functioned as a secret police, protecting the Communist Party and its regime at any cost. That's why, although the KGB was formally part of the Soviet government, in reality it was never controlled by it. The real directives for this machine came from completely another place, this grey building on Staraya Ploshchad in Moscow, the home of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And what happened inside this building defined the approach applied everywhere, even in remote corners like the Chernobyl region. By the time the first excavators arrived on the banks of the Pripyat River in 1970, the Soviet Union had already entered a period that would later be called the Era of Stagnation. Officially, the country was moving forward, building nuclear power plants, launching grand infrastructure projects and expanding its influence across the globe. Chernobyl was one of those projects, a true symbol of progress, actually even promoted abroad. But behind the scenes little was really changing. Under Leonid Brezhnev's leadership, the system had grown increasingly rigid. While the economy still showed signs of growth, real innovation had slowed, and the worsening health of Brezhnev and the lack of reforms benefited those at the top of the Communist Party. Benefited so much that even when Brezhnev realized the state of his health and wished to retire, his comrades in the Politburo forced him to stay. And so problems accumulated, quietly and dangerously. But much of the ideological course was steered not by Brezhnev himself, but by one quiet, ascetic man from that grey building. It was Mikhail Suslov, the party's chief ideologist. The real influence of Suslov was enormous, and being a super conservative Marxist, he ensured that nothing would change in the vision of ideology. In this atmosphere, the KGB led by Yuri Andropov, apart from fighting real threats, guarded against anything and anyone who dared to step against the system. Especially in strategically sensitive zones like Chernobyl. In 1972, this Chernobyl department opened a so-called file number 231. But what started with one file quickly grew into 7 huge volumes packed with documents. They covered 9,294 people of interest and 40 subcontractor organizations. By 1976, local KGB had 17 agents, having a formal cooperation agreement and mentioned in papers under their pseudonyms. Additionally, they had 58 so-called trusted informants. Those were loyal or cooperative people useful for getting information, but some of them actually had no idea they were part of the KGB network. In other words, for every 124 people working in Pripyat and at the power plant, there was a pair of watchful eyes. Meaning that by pure statistics, there is always a chance that some people captured in famous photos of Pripyat were not just random strangers. Agents and informants were embedded in work collectives, monitoring construction issues, public conversations, and social shifts. These people looked not like they are normally pictured in the popular movies. They acted absolutely ordinary, and you would never ever recognize their true intentions. Though our friends who lived in Pripyat say that there were rumors circulating regarding some very specific personalities. Add to this a wide variety of technical means, wiretapping, mail interception, and remote recording, and the web becomes even bigger. A good illustration of how efficient it actually was is a story told by the above-mentioned friends. Now imagine, so one day in the late 1970s, their relative who had previously had some very minor problems with the law came to visit them. He arrived by regular bus and planned to stay just a few days with them, so technically no one could know about his visit, because he did not check in anywhere. Yet, just a few hours after his arrival, some stranger approached him on the street. The man called him by full name, asked if he was indeed that person, and once the relative confirmed, the stranger, polite but insisting, told him he had to leave Pripyat before the end of the day. The KGB paid special attention to identifying so-called untrustworthy people among builders, workers, and visitors, especially those of German and Chinese nationalities or those with serious criminal records. They watched everyone who had ever contacted anyone abroad and those who had once been anti-Soviet insurgent or simply thought different than the party ordered to. A good insight in their work gives a report number 820 sent from Chernobyl to the KGB of the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. It is dated July 9, 1976, a few months before the first reactor was planned to be launched. According to our agent with pseudonym Muratov, in June 1975 there was a faulty construction of liquid waste storage that would eventually end in the release of radioactive water. In February 1976, there were supplied faulty pipes for the reactor's hydrogen circuit. The director of the power plant, Viktor Bryukhanov, knew about this fact, but nothing was done and faulty pipes continued to arrive from the factory. From August 1975, fresh uranium fuel started arriving at the power plant construction site. Because of insufficient attention from the director Viktor Bryukhanov and ignorance from deputy head of construction Comrade Hora, the storage for fresh fuel was not ready, and the special train stood unloaded for several days. The first reactor unit was planned to be put in operation in 1974. But due to insufficient supply of materials, it was rescheduled to 1975. In 1975, the situation repeated. The management took responsibility to launch it eventually on December 22, 1976. However, in reality the situation is as follows. They need to commission 1052 rooms, halls and facilities. In fact, as for July 1st, 1976, 195 were in finishing stages, 146 were still being assembled, and only 53 were ready. Above, we send for your information, head of the Chernobyl District Department of the KGB, Captain Tereshchenko. Reports like this give a very different level of understanding how things were actually going. One of the problems the KGB warned about was theft and extremely poor site security. Take, for example, reports from June 29, 1977, addressed to the head office of the KGB of the Ukrainian SSR. According to agents Fedorov, Kuznetsov, Skvortsov, and Muratov, from 1,518 rooms in the power plant building, only 3 are properly guarded. For example, in September, unknown persons entered through a ventilation shaft into the reactor protection systems room, dismantled and took with them switches, transistors, resistors, and other device components. In May 1977, from the room containing equipment that supplies the reactor with fresh fuel, an engine of a console crane disappeared. There were 5,000 people working at the power plant construction during the day and 2,000 at night. Yet, the designated number of guards for the site is 84 people. As of June 24, 1977, only 34 guards were staffed. Among them, 12 women. The average age is 50 to 55 years. Regarding all this, a Kiev Regional Committee of the party was informed. Above we sent for your information. Head of the Kiev Regional Department of the KGB, General Major N. Vakulenko. And there are numerous messages like this, about horribly bad conditions of fire safety and flammable materials used, about hundreds of injuries builders received because someone just didn't care about making light or fence, about violations of radiation safety, about much more, and with launch of first reactors, their quantity only increased. Finally, in one of these messages, dated 1978, there is a direct warning. This can end up with destruction of facilities, radioactive contamination of environment, and other emergency events. And just 2 months after, the ignored problems started to fire back. Here is the so-called special message from February 21, 1979, about the emergency stop of the Reactor 1 because of bad design of one of the systems. A bit more than a year passed, and there is a similar message from December 3, 1980. But this time about the emergency shutdown of Reactor 2. It was caused by a technician on duty in the reactor hall. He turned the blowdown valve of one of the control systems of steam drum separator because he thought it is in the wrong position. This ended in automatic triggering of the SF5 that shut down the reactor. There are many messages, but there is something what is common for all of them. Almost all of them end up with the notice that high officers of Communist Party and Republic and all Union KGB were informed. Yet this reactor shutdown incident happened in 1980, 10 years after the construction started, and still nothing had changed. This has only one explanation, which is actually historically true. Those in high offices of the party essentially were not different in their ignorance from those who didn't care to mix a good concrete or make a proper welding. And don't forget, the KGB fulfilled the demands of the party, and the party was much more interested in looking for potential enemies within. Look at this, February 16, 1981, a report about operative situation at Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the city of Pripyat. During the counterintelligence work, there were detected re-immigrants 1, visited capitalistic countries 98, visited socialistic countries 160, sending letters to capitalistic countries 11. In the process of studying the operational contingents, the following individuals were identified within the scope of counterintelligence interests. Lopatyuk Vidi, born in 1920, a rare immigrant from China suspected of ties to hostile intelligence services. Vadizhenko V.I., born in 1940, formerly the subject of operational investigation, warned by us after being identified as the author of anonymous anti-Soviet document sent abroad. Gospodinyuk Ya.I., born in 1954, maintains correspondence with a foreign national in Canada. It is not excluded that these individuals, as well as others harboring hostile intentions, may take advantage of existing malfunctions and violations of work norms that still persist. Unsatisfactory living conditions in dormitories of Pripyat led to preparations for mass anti-social demonstrations in July and August of 1980. The instigator was V. Yashchenko, a worker at the Jupiter factory who printed and distributed around 30 leaflets calling on dormitory residents to organize a protest. This negative manifestation was prevented. Due to the poor quality of bread produced by the Pripyat bakery and supply disruptions in certain shops, spontaneous gatherings occurred. The report ends with priorities of the operative work, and in the first places are these: search for illegal agents and tracking of state criminals, analysis of operative environment, exposure, prevention and suppression of organizational and other hostile activities by nationalists, as well as individuals with nationalist or revisionist sentiments among youth and the educated class. And only then is listed prevention of problems and emergencies at the power plant site. This ticking bomb of ignorance, however, had completely different priorities. April 20, 1981 – Special message about radiation contamination at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. February 15, 1982 – Shutdown of Unit 3 because of the ruptured steam pipe, which appeared to have thinner walls than it had to be. Unit 3 is out of operation for nearly 1 month. But this was just the beginning. If you ever have been to Pripyat, you likely know that absolutely all pavement of the streets is made of concrete. This is because the power plant had a big production of it. And yet, the streets built before autumn of 1982 are strangely additionally covered with asphalt. This is because they hide something really bad that happened in September of that year. A message from KGB in Kiev to all Union KGB in Moscow, September 10, 1982, about emergency situation at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. During plant repair works of Unit 1 was performed a test startup of it. When the power reached 20%, one fuel channel ruptured. There is no increased contamination of technological premises. September 13, 1982. Previously we reported about the emergency situation on Unit 1. Using a periscope, it was found that there is a nuclear fuel in damaged graphite blocks that had to be removed. Director Bryukhanov and Chief Engineer Akinfeev claim that there is no contamination. But that was not true. In reality, the rupture caused a slight release that was vented through these white pipes and then fell into surrounding environment. November 5, 1982, top secret, a report from the head of the KGB of Ukrainian SSR to the first secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine, Comrade Sherbitsky. According to the investigation commission's conclusions, the specific activity of radioactive fallout does not differ from levels typical for the normal operation of a nuclear power plant. Therefore, the implementation of evacuation measures is not deemed necessary. To verify the conclusions of the Commission, a group of the Institute of Nuclear Research of the Academy of Sciences of the Ukrainian SSR was then involved. And using more advanced equipment, the Institute's specialists determined that contamination was present, which in their opinion was unacceptable for the controlled area of the nuclear power plant. They also discovered hot fuel particles on the ground, 5 kilometers southwest of the plant. If inhaled or ingested by a human, this could cause severe illness. You may expect that this would be followed by request to protect the people. No, instead there is written this. There have been no instances of panic, rumors or other undesirable reactions. Through official and operative channels, measures were taken to prevent any leakage of the Commission's findings. Specialists from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the staff of the Institute for Nuclear Research who participated in the study have been warned not to disclose this information. Today, this little accident would be resolved quickly and with no harm to people and power plant, and yet they prefer to be silent. Vehicles spread contamination from the power plant site to Pripyat, and to hide the existing roads were quickly paved with asphalt. Ironically, this accident happened in a time of expected changes. On January 1982, Mikhail Suslov passes away. In November, he is followed by General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev. Starts the period later cynically nicknamed by Soviet people as 5-year plan of fancy funerals. The new de facto head of the Soviet Union becomes Yuri Andropov, who for nearly 20 years was the head of the all-Union KGB. Well, there is an opinion that he wanted to modernize the country and fight the problems, but he did it with repressive methods. And before his death in early 1984, the only real result was that his former department sealed its incredible level of power. It controlled nearly every aspect of life, fighting even smallest ideological deviations. This was daily reality across the entire Soviet Union, and just as much in the Chernobyl region. In the first half of the 80s, a separate branch of KGB was created in Pripyat. The file number 231, which at that moment had already dozens of volumes, was split to two, one for power plant and one for the city. Documents from that period are full of reports of the poor construction quality of Chernobyl Unit 4, such as observed cracks in structural parts of the building. There were actually so many of them that I guess they worth a separate episode. Among papers from that period is an informational message sent from the KGB in Moscow to Chernobyl in May 1983. It is titled "About some problems of the nuclear power plants of the USSR." It warns about possible heavy nuclear disaster in case of rupture of the main coolant circulation contour. It is said it will lead to contamination 60 times worse than it was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The author, Lieutenant Colonel Samoylov, says that it is not physically possible to install a protective containment around RBMK reactor. And so he makes a conclusion. Therefore, the Leningrad, Kursk and Chernobyl nuclear power plants currently pose the greatest risks in terms of their continued operation, which may lead to dangerous consequences. There are also protocols of talks with external experts regarding the design and safety of RBMK 1000 reactor, and they always end with one and the same sentence. The person was advised not to disclose the matters that were discussed with them. And yet a direct result of Andropov's rule was that they were far more afraid of possible subversions and foreign intelligence. Here is a letter from September 2nd, 1983. Hostile intelligence services are showing interest in the facility, using various companies for this purpose. Between 1981 and 1983, the plant repeatedly received promotional letters and brochures from an American company, some of which included questionnaires aimed at collecting information. The company Rank Xerox acted similarly. This company was particularly active following the 1982 accident. Notably, the envelopes were addressed to Chernobyl 2, the site of the Long-Range Space Communications Center, a highly restricted facility of the Ministry of Defense. In May 1983, participants of the International Atomic Energy Agency scientific trip visited the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Among them were EIA members Vanos Koursanis from USA and Guillermo S. Corpus from Philippines. They are suspected of links to hostile intelligence services. During the meeting, both were notably active. The conversation was recorded on portable tape recorder that included a transmission antenna, and so could have been used for other purposes. In 1983, KGB approves the plan of enforcing counterintelligence up to 1985. It was codenamed Atom. It is almost completely focused on identification of foreign agents and spies, monitoring foreign diplomats, conference attendees, and other people who could search for any information. There is an interesting fragment in it. To counter attempts by hostile forces to discredit the Soviet Union's achievements in the peaceful use of nuclear energy, it is recommended to prepare and deliver targeted information about the state of affairs in this area to relevant Western business circles. It is necessary to assess the feasibility of carrying out specific disinformation to misleading the adversary regarding problems in the Soviet nuclear energy sector. In February 1984, Andropov passes away. In his place came Konstantin Chernenko, a former advisor of Brezhnev. Chernenko was so ill that most of his one-year cadence he spent in a hospital. And so he didn't make any significant influence on politics before he passed away in spring 1985. In his place came Mikhail Gorbachev, who, as we all know, later started to finally introduce systematical reforms that were so much needed. But that changes happened much later, and in Chernobyl the machine of paranoia continued to run, constantly looking mostly in the wrong direction. In the beginning of August 1984, KGB of the USSR issues an order on intensifying the counterintelligence at all Soviet nuclear power plants. For Chernobyl site and city of Pripyat, it meant a significant extension of the network of agents and informants. The regime of security at the power plant became much stricter and reports on problems even more detailed. Somewhere in early 1986, branch office of the KGB in Pripyat became a standalone department. At Lesy Ukrainki Street in Pripyat even started the construction of a dedicated building for it, because they had a big work ahead. But little they knew that it was too late. Decades of ignorance finally fired back. And here I would like to say you something extremely important. The creators of this compilation of documents are serious analysts, yet they presented these papers unedited and with no comments. Instead, in the beginning, there is a separate general foreword that has a warning in its end. The reader must think maximally critical about what is said in that papers, because everything had to match the ideology, and people who wrote these reports could follow their own interest, career, work-related, egoistic or altruistic. It is certain that at least some operatives and some agents indeed truly cared and wanted to prevent something really bad. But it is equally certain that all of them had one single task: to serve and defend the rotten Soviet system. And this is the second part of this compilation, covering the post-disaster period. And in the scope of this evidence, the official version of events created by Soviets that put all responsibility on reactor operators simply collapses. Speaking of which, if you wish, we can continue, and if so, let us know in the comments. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If you want to find much more research data from us, join us on our Patreon. The link is in the description below. And we will see you in the next episode.